you.
Yeah, we are now recording.
Okay, Rachel, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but I know Rachel Hart. Farrugia Wismayer from Malta. I'm so excited to have you be part of this. We've had several people from Malta at our conferences, so it's just exciting to continue the trend. And I want to tell everyone a little bit about Rachel. She has her Bachelor of Commerce, specializing in business management. She's worked a lot with financial services industry and has been working for 8 years in a leading bank in Malta. But she wanted to change her career, and she just happened to meet Emmanuel, who helped her to change into teaching subjects of accounting and economics in a girls' school, because she wants to help the youth grow and flourish, just like all of us did when we first started teaching. Her presentation today is going to be something related to financial literacy, and she wants to connect her banking experience with some financial literacy skills for young adults. So I'm excited to hear what your focus and what your path has been in this area. Thank you, Rachel, for showing up, and everyone give her a hand clap.
Thank you. So I'm just going to share my presentation now. So is it okay? Can everyone see it?
Yes,
Okay,
we can.
great.
Mhm.
It is.
Now we can see
It
the
is PowerPoint. Yeah, you might want to click slideshow to begin it.
Okay. So good morning or good evening to whoever it is in the room. So my presentation is basically going to explore the development of financial literacy of young adults from the perspective of the banking industry, as well as from the education provided in the local schools in Malta. So before starting off with the findings of my study, I would like to start by exploring the many perceptions of financial literacy, and then explore the findings from the bankers, which I interviewed, as well as the teachers. So according to many researchers, such as Poton, Visano, and Edofia, financial literacy is perceived as a life skill that connects academic and practical knowledge to enhance financial attitudes and behavior. However, results from the OECD suggest that financial education is not provided in adequate and equitable ways to all students. Financial literacy, according to Hung, has been defined as the ability to use knowledge and skills to manage one's financial resources effectively to achieve a lifetime of financial security. On the other hand, the Ministry of the Czech Republic seeks to promote the use of diverse financial resources for citizens to improve their finances. So this indicates a more versatile approach in the country's financial education. However, Davis is of the belief that most education programs organized around the world focus on the cultivation of desired financial behaviors. And we may ask the question, that desired by whom? By the individual, by the person using the financial services, by the financial services providers, or by the government? In fact, Brandt later argued that this perspective of financial literacy shifts the success or basically the failure of financial choices to the individual, in contrast to the mismanagement or mis-selling that may have occurred in the financial services industry. In fact, the framework of Davis incorporates three different perspectives of financial literacy. in the first perspective, we can see at an individual level, financial literacy would basically incorporate whatever the other definitions have given. That would mean that basically it would incorporate the ability of a person to be able to take care of their personal finances. And this would include the ability to budget, maintain sufficient liquidity, or take into account the effect of inflation on savings. And then there is the financial services perspective. And over here, through this perspective, Davis also sees the importance that people would also be able to understand the mechanisms by which interest rates vary between individuals, between one individual and another, and also between one bank and another, and also the reasons why banks may take certain measures and may promote certain products instead of others. And this would basically enable people to make better informed decisions when using financial services, rather than just rely on the employees of a bank to just provide judgment and then follow through with this particular advice. And finally, the government dimension is basically giving a holistic approach to financial literacy, as it encompasses the ability to understand certain government strategies and measures, such as the changes in tax rates, changes in social benefit payments, amongst many other policies that the government may adopt from time to time. So basically, in short, Davis strongly connects financial literacy to the idea of empowering citizens with enough knowledge, not only to make informed decisions, but also to understand the mechanisms and strategies taking place around them. So this brings me back to the research questions of my study. So the research questions which I aim to answer are, firstly, how financial literate are young adults to make informed decisions related to the banking services? And I sought to answer this question by researching within the banking industry. And my second research question was, how can financial literacy at school be improved to enable young adults to make informed decisions, and what possible pedagogies could be adopted in this regard? And this question was mainly investigated through asking and discussing with business teachers, business education teachers, and trying to come up with, through their experience, with different pedagogies that could be basically adopted in order to enhance financial literacy. Now, the research was conducted by adopting a social constructivist approach. And this is because the study was mainly focused on perceptions of bankers and teachers. So the study was conducted by adopting a qualitative methodology through the use of semi-structured interviews. So basically, 6 banking officials were interviewed and 6 business subject teachers were interviewed as well. So the interviews aimed at providing an insight to the current trends of young adults' consumption of financial products through perceptions of banking officials, and also pedagogies that may facilitate the teaching and learning of the financial literacy skills. Now, before moving on to the findings, I would like to explain the roles that the bank employees interviewed were within their employment at the time. So basically, a bank manager's role would be to oversee all banking activities of a branch of a bank, of a particular bank within a certain location. A personnel manager would fall under the direct supervision of the branch manager, and the personnel manager's role would be to oversee activities related to personal banking, as opposed to business transactions. Now, a financial advisor is in charge of advising clients on various investments, including retirement plans. The advisor's role would also incorporate the conduction of a risk profile of a client, whereby they would ask personal questions and try and come up with a proper risk profile in order to be able to then advise on the most appropriate products or stocks that a client may wish to take up. A relationship officer, on the other hand, would assist clients in conducting banking transactions such as opening bank accounts, applying for short and long-term loans, as well as the selling of certain types of investments. So the banking officials interviewed included the six banking officials from different banks, and these people were spread around different branches around Malta. All of them had at least 5 years working experience, some of which had 25 years or more working experience in a bank. Now, the teachers, on the other hand, worked as accounts, economics, or business studies teachers. They had a minimum of 10 years experience, with 2 of which actually had over 30 years experience in teaching, either in a church school or a private school or a state school. Now, the following is an overview of the Maltese curriculum. So basically, the Maltese curriculum is based on 8 learning areas, and these include the area of languages, mathematics, science and technology, health and physical education, religious and ethics education, education for democracy, humanities, and visual and performing arts. And the cross-curricular teams, which basically aim to incorporate more than one learning area to achieve a comprehensive education, included literacy, digital literacy, learning to learn and cooperative learning, education for sustainable development, education for entrepreneurship, creativity and innovation, and education for diversity. As we can see over here, financial literacy doesn't really show up in the Maltese curriculum, so it might be embedded within the subjects, but it's not really given that much importance. In fact, Zammi analyzed financial literacy in the Maltese curriculum through an alternative learning program by the use of mixed methodologies, and she identified as well that financial literacy is a key entrepreneurship skill. And again, she highlighted that financial literacy does not feature as a cross-curricular theme within the national curriculum. Now, Malia also stated that the learning outcome of employability, together with the cross-curricular theme of entrepreneurship, are both closely linked to financial literacy. And these skills, such as economic stability, independence, responsible risk-taking, and risk assessment, are based on financial literacy skills. Now, subjects in the Maltese curriculum that contain elements of financial literacy include the personal, social, and career development subject. Now, the subject is basically offered to all students across all years. Apart from that, there is the home economics subject, the economic subject, business studies, as well as accounting. However, it is important to note that these subjects are option subjects, and they are taken up by some students from the age of 13 till their SEC O-level. Also, PSCD touches upon budgeting skills. So it's basically, it basically takes care of part of the personal financial literacy. It doesn't go into the other dimensions as mentioned by Davis. And since it focuses basically on other social and personal well-being skills as well as certain other personal development areas. And also Brandt argues that financial education offered in compulsory subjects should be provided by experts in the field. Whereas usually PhD teachers are usually coming from a psychology background. Now, I'll move on to the findings of bankers. So, according to bankers, one finding which all bankers highlighted was the poor financial literacy of young people in Malta, which is reflected in the growing tendency to seek immediate gratification. Now, by immediate gratification, they meant that actually young people who seek their services are not willing to wait to buy something that they would want. So if, for instance, they would decide to buy the latest model of a mobile phone, it wouldn't really matter to them if they would have to spend all of their savings, or else if they would have to take a short-term loan to get this mobile phone. For them, what the bankers perceive as being important to young people is that they get the mobile phone as fast as possible. So basically, this immediate gratification is evidenced by the over-reliance on credit facilities, especially for daily and luxury purchases. It is also evidenced by the reluctance to save for the future. In fact, bankers also pointed out that young people are not interested in taking up a pension plan, and usually they start to show a little bit of interest when they are over 25 years or maybe close to their mid-30s. So what I can say is that findings have shown from many international researchers that financially illiterate people are prone to low participation in the stock markets, portfolio under diversification, over indebtedness, as was highlighted by the Maltese banking industry, the use of informal and possibly even illegal borrowing methods, mental disorders such as stress and depression. Overall, people are less likely to engage in healthy financial practices. So one may predict that these adverse effects may become more widespread in Malta, especially in the future, unless something is done to increase the financial literacy skills within the schools, within the children in the schools. So, bankers did highlight that they felt the need to advise young people when they are making such choices, such as taking a short-term loan to take up or to buy a mobile, for instance. So how does financial advice actually affect the individual? So low levels of financial literacy do not necessarily lead to poor financial decisions, according to Riess and Fuhrmann. And Calcagno and Monticono also pointed out that this may be compensated by advice and guidance from qualified resources. So basically, we can say that in the same way that an individual may seek expert medical advice from a doctor because they are not experts in the medical field, then likewise a lack of financial knowledge may be counteracted by pursuing advice from an expert in the financial field. So this argument directs towards the analysis of roles that financial advisors may have in the consumer decision-making. So Buzo reported that customers with higher levels of trust in financial advisors significantly increase their probability of participating in the stock market. However, following financial advice would really benefit the individual, or would it really be of benefit to the bank who is actually offering these services? So in fact, according to Davis, this issue may suggest that problems may lie in both the demand of financial advisory services, that is, in the demand of services of financial advisors from people who do not have sufficient financial knowledge. And the problem may also lie in the supply of such services. That is, the promotion of services for the benefit of the bank to achieve more profit, or else from the point of view of employees to maybe achieve a larger performance bonus or a commission. So this can be compared to the Matthew effect of accumulated advantage, which basically explains that people who are at an advantage can get more out of a particular service because they would get better advice. And on the other hand, people with less knowledge would maybe not get the advice that they would actually need to get. So what we are saying here is that people at an advantage would be at a further advantage than the disadvantage. So this gap would actually increase with the provision of financial advice. Now, another interesting finding that came out from the banker's perspective was that young females are perceived to be more equipped at making informed financial choices than young men. So basically, findings from bank officials have shown that young women take a leading role in financial matters. This was even observed when heterosexual couples made use of banking services. Bankers did observe that young women seemed to be more aware of personal expenses and budgeting than men. In fact, Charles and Adam, who are two bankers, were of the opinion that women were more financially literate than men, and they linked this financial literacy to the use of critical thinking skills and the ability to seek further information when they are faced with various financial options. Now, these skills are also recognized by the National Curriculum Framework of Malta as competencies which are necessary for lifelong learning. Now, on the other hand, PISA found no significant difference between genders when they held their study. Also, a banker noted that men over 50 years of age tended to be more financially literate than women of the same age. And this echoes findings of various international studies. In fact, we can see that during the 1990s and before that, women only formed part of 27% of persons in full-time employment. And the male at the time was typically the breadwinner of the family and may have had most say over financial decisions. So maybe this was the reason why men were more financially literate at that time. So I will move on to the findings of teachers, and basically I'll be focusing on pedagogies which they highlighted that may be most important to achieving a better financial literacy. So students studying business education subjects are more exposed to financial education. So obviously, students who are taking up accounts, economics, or business studies are more exposed to financial situations because they study and they'd be able to link their experiences with certain concepts. However, these subjects are perceived as academic, and the connection of knowledge to practice depends on the teacher's disposition. Also, financial education provided by the government, as well as financial institutions, needs to be unbiased, because sometimes when financial institutions embark on financial education, there may be a hidden agenda, in the sense that they may be promoting the use of certain financial products. Apart from that, financial education should be relevant and appealing to young people. And teachers also highlighted that this should be provided on an ongoing basis and in collaboration with educators. So they did highlight that the financial institutions should work with educators, but as well on an ongoing basis and in an unbiased way. So the introduction of a financial literacy program in the secondary school was perceived to be most suited in fostering the financial education to students through the core curriculum. So this was the preferred way for teachers to enhance financial education within the curriculum. And the recommended components of this financial literacy program included economic concepts of scarcity, opportunity cost, and market failure to encourage critical thinking skills. As well, these concepts may make it easier for students to connect their situations in their daily lives with these concepts. And maybe it would make them reflect on certain situations and find ways of improving their financial behavior. Now, the use of social stories was seen as important, as this would portray consequences of excessive use of credit, and the use of technology to create simulations of financial activities. And this would also work towards the cross-curricular theme, which was highlighted in the National Curriculum Framework of digital literacy. And the focus on learner-centered pedagogies revolving around the creation of experiences that foster initiative and proactiveness. So, hopefully, one day, the authorities might see the importance of financial literacy, and this may be recognized as an important area to be included in the curriculum, and hopefully, eventually, we would have some proper education that would be given to students in order to try and overcome the adverse outcomes that bankers are currently experiencing from young people at the moment. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. You mentioned in your information how young we should talk to the young kids about financial literacy. Was there an age or something that you noticed in your research?
Basically, the financial literacy program was suggested for students who are in secondary school, that is around 10 years and over. But I do believe that students within the primary should have certain knowledge on concepts of opportunity cost and of ways in which they can use their resources better. In fact, one teacher had actually highlighted the fact that ideally financial literacy should start as early as the primary years as well.
Okay. Have you started with your kids?
Yes. I try.
Okay.
Two of them are teenagers, so it's a struggle because of peer pressure. So they would know certain concepts and they would understand them, but when they come to put to practice, they don't reason out that
right
rationally.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Or any other?
I want to share an experience.
Okay,
that
Juanita.
we have a project with the elementary school by the Department of Education that just giving information of savings to teachers, students, and parents together. And we start with the third grade students. We have about 3 days just having discussion of savings, advantage of savings, and everything. And we are trying at the Department of Education to start at least with 1 course or 1 seminar, whatever it is, of financial education for all kids since they are in the elementary school, because it is a big thing on saving. You know, there are too many people have student loans and they don't pay and they can't pay, and we should get people to be aware of the importance of savings. Well, we should start in elementary school, I think.
I think that's a very important point, Juanita.
Even at home, like Raquel is doing at home with her kids. Even at home, we should start with them.
Right.
Wednesday, and la second, the third, is she?
Oh.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. This was really important.
Josephine had a question, I think.
Good.
Josephine is talking, but she's still on mute.
I would like to make a comment regarding the education of young adults and the banking sector. Basically, in the past years, it would have been really easy for young children and young adults to initiate their financial literacy experience by utilizing banking services like opening of savings account, etc. I find it very, very strange that banking officials, on one hand, state how important it is that young adults and young children are educated in that respect, but then they make it very, very difficult for young children and young adults to open up and to maintain savings account. And to a certain extent, they tend, for example, to close accounts if not utilized, to charge high charges if the account is inactive and things like that. I don't know whether Rachel, you could, elaborate on the matter.
Yes, basically at the moment, the banks were being faced with a lot of potential, basically risks of defaults of loans, and there were many foreigners trying to open up accounts. So the banks in Malta have adopted strict policies that would basically prevent people from opening accounts. I mean, at the end of the day, the young people do suffer, because if there is, say, a 15-year-old who has an account and does not use it, then why should this person, why should this child be charged just because they are not using their account? So the thing is that the policies have been set up, but they are basically there for different reasons, but others are suffering for the reasons which are different from the bank.
Rachel, you can stop sharing your slides if you'd like.
I just have a question, please. Do any other countries have school banking? I don't know whether we still have it here, but when our children were young, I think Tuesday was banking day at school. Each child had their little deposit booklet, and they would take $1 and take it to school. It was put in the satchel. The bank person would come and collect it, take it back to the bank, process the deposits, and return their books so that they could see their savings grow. I don't know whether anyone else has that sort of program in their country, and I don't think we do anymore because the bank didn't want to pay for the processing, I guess.
We had a little brown envelope that you'd stick your pennies and dimes in, and the bank would come collect it. I still have that account, although that account has been bought out by several banks, larger and larger since then.
Yeah, David.
How many years
Emmanuel?
ago was that, David?
That was 65 years ago.
Years ago.
And what's impressive is I still remember it.
Emmanuel,
Very
you
good.
had your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yes, I would like to ask Rachel, how have your research, how has it influenced you now as a teacher? You have been teaching now. How has it molded you? And if you have any experiences from your banking experience, if you had any significant situations which led you to think. And thank you for this presentation, first of all.
Thank you. Yes, so basically, it has changed my perspective. So when I am teaching students, I do highlight, and even coming from the banking background, I do highlight certain issues that students may be faced with. So we do hold discussions on, for instance, why do students in Malta the transport by bus is free for students, but students, in order to hurry up, they end up taking a shared taxi. So we do discuss these certain situations, because obviously taking a taxi would deplete their finances, especially if they are on a fixed pocket money. So we do discuss these issues. I also discuss, for instance, consequences of them not saving anything, because when I do point out that when they grow up and when they decide to take a house loan, the bank would actually conduct an investigation on the creditworthiness of individuals. And if they do not save, and if they always say, for instance, they have a credit card and they're always on credit, then the bank would take this into consideration. And it would also result in them getting maybe a smaller loan. And students don't really realize, and they say, like, it's okay, like there's quite a while for us to take a loan. But at the end of the day, maybe it would get them thinking, as they approach towards the age of, say, purchasing a property, maybe these things would come to mind. So we do discuss a lot of these situations, and they are quite interested in listening to banking procedures, because they always hear them from the side, like, of their parents or from their personal experiences, rather than from someone who used to work at the bank.
I would just like to add one thing. I was financial coordinator, economic education coordinator for a 17,000 student school district at one time. And we tried not only to have a course in personal finance at the secondary level, but also we actually paid teachers to go to a workshop to integrate economic concepts into elementary and middle school classes. So this is a possibility as well. When you can't have a designated course, it is possible to integrate them. Even at the primary school level, you can teach about choices or supply and demand and many other different issues along those lines that they could be integrating with the current, like into their math courses or even into their social studies courses. So it's possible to do an integration when you can't actually put a course into a lower level curriculum. And thank you for your presentation. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
May I add a comment?
Sure.
This is Ruth. My comment is, it's too bad that since many years now, and currently, many of the universities and colleges immediately offer a loan application.
Ruth, you're breaking
Pardon?
up quite a bit. Away you,
Can you,
you're in and out. Not really.
about financial institutions with college entrance? No?
Yeah, I can hear you.
When a person enters university or admission university or colleges, the college immediately offers a financial loan application. And unfortunately, maybe a lot of students, entry students, don't know about financial literacy or the process of loans, and would really help if maybe it was certain that the students had taken a course or had some of that information in high school or college, and perhaps the U.S. student will be as high as it is for that matter, because I don't think that a lot of young people know the extent of the damage that student loan can make on their life, even after graduate.
Okay, we are now recording. Welcome.
Yes, the emphasis of our conference this year centers upon the themes of innovation and adaptability. These concepts are widely acknowledged as integral components of entrepreneurial thinking, which is considered fundamental skills in contemporary and future contexts. Therefore, this evening, I'm saying this evening because it's evening for Malta, we are delighted to present to you Julia, Riess, Bettina Fuhrmann, and Gerhard Geissler, who will share with you today an examination of the current state of entrepreneurial thinking, specifically focusing on the entrepreneurial intentions of secondary school students in Austria. Julia is a university assistant postdoc at the Institute of Business Education in Vienna, focusing amongst others on the topics of student beliefs and entrepreneurship education. Bettina is the head of the Viennese Institute of Business Education. She is renowned as a specialist in the field of financial literacy. And Gerhard is a senior lecturer postdoc at the Institute of Business Education in Vienna, focusing amongst others on the topics of business management, entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship education. So we look forward to learn from your research. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for this kind introduction to the topic, and also to introduce Julia and Bettina, which must excuse themselves because Julia has become mother recently, and yeah, well, her little son cannot be alone without her, and so she cannot come. And Bettina is actually in another conference at the same time, so I'm alone, but I will try my best. Can you see my screen, the presentation? Yeah, well, perfect. So after this very kind introduction of my presentation, I will do this presentation in 4 steps. Firstly, I will give you a very quick background information about the motivation for research on entrepreneurial intention in secondary level schools in Austria. Then afterwards, I will give you just an overview about the research design and how we conducted the research. Then I will present you some selected results, and finally we'll summarize the results and draw some conclusions. Now, let's take a look at the background of the study. and I will start with a clarification of the term entrepreneurial intention and how we used this term in our research. So when starting a business is a conscious behavior, starting a business is never accidental. So behavioral models assume that a behavior is determined by a person's intention. This goes back to Eisen and his colleagues with a very, very important theory that we used in our research. And in the context of startups, this intention is referred to as the intention to start a business, or using another term, entrepreneurial intention. So for our research, we used this theory of planned behavior according to Eisen for several reasons. Firstly, it is a good theory to explain entrepreneurial intention, and so it is a good basis for answering the research questions of our research. And this theory has been used a lot in other research works dealing with the question what explains the entrepreneurial intention, so that there is a good possibility to compare the results of our research with already existing results and findings. And against this background of the theory of planned behavior, we interpret entrepreneurial intention as the conscious state of mind that precedes action and directs attention towards a goal, and in this case, starting a business. But the question is, why are we dealing with this issue? We is the Institute of Business Education. Now, while entrepreneurs are often described as, so to say, the backbone of a healthy economy, they are said that it is said that they have the potential to make bold decisions, tackle current problems, and drive social development. So for us, as members of the Institute of Business Education in Vienna, who have a focus on teacher education for teachers who will teach students at upper secondary schools in Austria, the following questions were relevant. Namely, how strong is the entrepreneurial intention of students at upper secondary schools? And what determines the entrepreneurial intention of upper secondary students? So to find answers to these research questions, we used research design. We developed a research design, which I would like to introduce you very shortly. So first, we developed a standardized questionnaire, as you do this so often. And this questionnaire was used in Austria-wide, nationwide in Austria. As a target group, we defined secondary level school students, including both students from general higher education schools and commercial academies. What a commercial academy is, I will explain afterwards. This is a very rare school type and typical for Austria. We were happy to be able to analyze 2,376 records, which is a lot. The test group was around 60% female and 40% male. So before we go ahead with the results and the research design, I would suggest to have a very short glance on the secondary schools in Austria, because this is relevant for the interpretation or for the conscious interpretation of the results. So upper secondary level in Austria provides numerous opportunities, a lot of opportunities for further educational advancement after compulsory schooling, which is this dark field in this table. Compulsory schooling in Austria starts with the age of 6 and ends with the age of 15. And the educational stage of upper secondary level mainly includes vocational higher schools and the upper levels of general secondary schools. At vocational higher schools, students have the opportunity to choose from a wide range of specialized fields based on their individual interests and career goals. So defined, the available fields of study include, for example, business and management and technology and tourism and health and social sciences and so on. And the specific type of school that focuses on the field of business and management is called Handelsakademie, which is part of the upper level school system. And this Handelsakademie is called Commercial Academy in English. It is not really easy to translate this term because the Handelsakademie is the German term for that, was founded in the 19th century and is, so to say, based in the monarchy of the former Habsburgs. So this is a very special school type. Typical students attending a commercial academy in Austria exhibit certain characteristics and attributes. Typically, students of commercial academies are characterized by, how shall I say, a keen interest in business-related topics, have analytical thinking skills. Mostly they are motivated to gain a comprehensive understanding of business principles, organizational structures, and entrepreneurial practices. And finally, students at commercial academies often have a very clear career aspiration in areas such as finance, marketing, international business, or even entrepreneurship. So they are mostly driven to acquire practical professional success either after school or after university, because they do some sort of A-levels which allow them to study at a university. And the commercial academy in Austria has always positioned itself as a vocational higher school that serves as a, how shall I say, a social elevator. A social elevator for its graduates, because this type of school appeals not only to students from family with moderate to higher income or education-oriented backgrounds, but often also attracts students from low-income families or those with limited exposure to education. So this socioeconomic characteristic above all distinguishes students attending a commercial academy from those attending the upper level of a general secondary school. And this information on this difference is very necessary to interpret the results with more conscious. By the way, I can show you a preliminary finding of the study. So at this point, so you can see that entrepreneurial intention was scaled between 1 and 5, with 1 representing the minimum, that means a low entrepreneurial intention, and 5, which means a high interest on starting a business. It can be observed that 28.5% of the students, of the respondents, have a low interest in starting a business, whereas 22.5% have a high interest in starting a business. 49% fall in the middle range in terms of their entrepreneurial intention. So they do not have low or high intention to start a business. So how did we exercise the research house about the standardized questionnaire? So the standardized questionnaire has a lot of items, of course, and we divided it in 4 sections. So the first section was derived from the variables of the theory of planned behavior from Eitzen and his colleagues, because this was the basis of the whole research. So there are variables dealing with the question, how is the attitude of a student towards starting a business? How do they think that they are able to control the situation? And the term subjective norm comes from the perceived feeling that they have some, maybe they think they are pressured to start a business or not. So these are the most important variables of this theory. But since the theory itself explicitly invites to define further perspectives to explain the entrepreneurial intention of students or surveyed people, we added 3 more sections, which we called facets of learning success, facets of learning experience, and then a couple of items dealing with personal information on gender and age and type of school and so on. So concerning the facets of learning success, we asked them about their general interest in economic content, or how they think that they act in economic situations, and also their general economic knowledge. And concerning the third point, which is facets of learning experience, we asked them how relevant they think that their learning experience in circumstances with entrepreneurial education have been, how satisfied they have been with this learning experience, and how shall I say, if they think that this learning experience improved the clarity and certainty to start a business or not. So if this is an option or not for earning money. So what are the results of this research? I will present you these results in 2 steps. First, I will show you the results in a regression analysis, but what we did was the following. As we defined 4 sections in our questionnaire with a lot of variables, we did not what normally would have been done, namely to explain with a linear regression the effect of all these factors to the entrepreneurial intention, but what we have been doing was a hierarchical regression. That means section by section, we try to explain in how far these different sections are able to explain the entrepreneurial intention of our students. So we did a hierarchical regression first. And afterwards, I will show you a second result, which we have done with an alternative calculation method. I will show you afterwards. So what are the results of this hierarchical regression analysis? Remembering that we have 4 sections, which we step by step calculated, so to say, on the research to find explanation on about the entrepreneurial intention of our students. So first, we analyzed the personal information. So you can see in the headline, hierarchical regression analysis 104, adding the personal information. And you can see that we have 4 significant items. These 4 significant items are highlighted in blue. So interesting enough, gender, school, language spoken at home, and the question if the student knows an entrepreneur are significantly high and contribute to the explication on the entrepreneurial intention of the students. But as a whole, the model 1, which includes the personal information, does not explain very much. That means 0.7 would be very good or good enough. This part of the regression analysis explains the entrepreneurial intention with 0.110. So this is not really good. This is different if we add the variables of the theory of planned behavior. Here you can see that 2 of the 3 variables, namely the attitude towards the behavior to start a business and the perceived behavioral control when starting a business, they are significantly high. That means that these 2 variables are able to explain the entrepreneurial intention in a very high score. By the way, as you see, and as is so often the case, the variable of the subjective norm, that is the question of how high the perceived social pressure is with regard to starting a business, is not meaningful. Unfortunately, the facets of learning success do not explain this much. I mean, the general interest in economic content is significant. And also the general self-efficacy in economic situations is significant. But as you can see, the raise in the explanation from model 2 to model 3 is not this much, is not this high. So we can say that learning success, knowledge, does not have this impact that we would wish, because above all, as business educators, as you can see, general economic knowledge, for example, is not significant, and it has a minus. That is not good from our perspective. So we have to deal with this question, of course. The situation will be changing when we see model 4. That means when we add the facets of learning experience. Above all, the clarity gained through the learning experience is very high. That means if it is very clear that do I want to start a business at all, makes a very important contribution to explaining the intention to start a business. However, this study is not only about presenting the various factors influencing the intention to start a business in a grouped, that means hierarchical way. We did also another calculation, which is interesting. You will see. Because we also aim to identify significant differences between students with a low, medium, and high entrepreneurial intention to start a business. For this purpose, we did a comparison of mean values, and this mostly the results confirm essential results from the regression analysis. But it makes some things a little bit clearer. For example, so remember we have 3 groups. The one group, which is 28.5%, have a low entrepreneurial intention. then 22.5% of our students have a high entrepreneurial intention, and the rest is in the medium. These three groups and tried to figure out what makes the difference between these three groups. And the most important things are highlighted in green, in dark green. If one looks at the personal characteristics of students, for example, those namely that have a strong or high inclination to start a business, we can see that these students are mainly male students from higher vocational schools, that means from commercial academies, who also speak a language other than German at home, and who know entrepreneurs. However, above all, the knowledge of entrepreneurs is very interesting because if someone knows an entrepreneur, he can have either a high intention to start a business or a low intention. So a hierarchical regression analysis would not explain this difference. So you have to take care when calculating in a certain way. You have to make it also in an alternative way, because then you can see some differences. For example, not significant, but interesting is, for example, the mother's higher education. Because mother's higher education has different effects on the entrepreneurial intention. If the mother's highest in education is high, that means they are academics, university graduates or something like that, they influence obviously the students in a way that they say, okay, be reluctant to start a business. Or on the other side, they can improve the entrepreneurial intention. So let's have a look to the field of the variables of the theory of planned behavior. So the first two fields, namely the attitude towards the behavior and the perceived behavioral control, are confirming the results of the hierarchical regression. But the subjective norm is interesting. Why? Apparently, students with a low intention, you see this in the dark green field, with a low intention feels less pressure to start a business than students with a medium or high intention to start a business, which means that those students who have a high intention to start a business also have, so to say, sort of a pressure from their peer group to start a business, and therefore there is some interest to start a business derived from. Not as meaningful, but very interesting is the next factor, namely the comparison of the means towards the general economic knowledge. Obviously, a good knowledge has the result that the entrepreneurial intention becomes low. That means if you know a lot about business and economics, you are reluctant to start a business. But if you have a high knowledge, a good knowledge in economics and business, on the other side has the result that the entrepreneurial intention is high. So we can plausibly explain why this is. If you do not know nothing, and if you know a lot, you start a business with more awareness. But however, hierarchical regression would not have explained this difference. A final look to the facets of learning experience do not show this much differences to the hierarchical regression analysis, so mostly the results of both methods of calculation are confirming each other. So if I come to my conclusion, and key findings I will summarize and ask some questions finally. So we have seen that 22.5% of the students surveyed belong to the group of people with a high entrepreneurial intention. That means they have the intention to start a business. So, and as we added 3 further fields to the variables of the theory of planned behavior, which play a huge role in explaining the entrepreneurial intention, we added 3 more sections, namely personal information, facets of learning success, and facets of learning experience. And as we have seen, the section personal information does not explain this much as a whole, but it shows some very specific characteristics of students who have a high entrepreneurial intention, because they are obviously males visiting a commercial academy, speak another language than German at home, and know some entrepreneurs. And also the facets of learning and success and learning experience have their influence. Above all, the facets of learning experience, namely the satisfaction with the experience and in how far they gained clarity through this learning experience to start a business or not. And interestingly enough, research is never the end of something. It is always the start of the next, because there are a lot of questions actually. Some of the most important questions that we are discussing at our institute is concerning the personal information. We have to ask, so what exactly does this group of people need, namely these people who are male, are visiting a commercial academy, do not speak German at home, and know some entrepreneurs, in terms of, so what do these people with these characteristics need in terms of support to successfully convert the entrepreneurial intention in actual behavior, so that now they have the intention, but as you have, maybe you remember that they have been 17 years old. So they have 2 more years for visiting school. So is this intention, so to say, strong enough to convert this intention to actual behavior, and that means to start a business? And not only this group is interesting, but also the other group, namely, why are other groups of people less inclined to start a business, and what support would they need to raise their entrepreneurial intention? And of course, for us as business educators from the Institute of Business Education, we have to ask, when it comes to promoting entrepreneurial intention, is it primarily about arousing interest in the sense of making a lot of noise and events and whatever to clarify whether founding is an option or not? And what role should the knowledge transfer play, especially with regard to actually running the company? Because founding is one side, but running the company is the next step. So actually, there are a lot of questions, but I would like to stop now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for this sharing of thought-provoking, I think, research. I think we have a lot to discuss. I open the floor for a discussion, please.
This is Dana, I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, we are recording again. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Shareefah Muhammad. She has an EDD. She has served as a business education curriculum instructional leader in a post-secondary vocational rehabilitation training program at the Chicago Lighthouse for more than 30 years. The students who were blind or visually impaired came from different continents such as Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America. Upon enrollment in the program, they possess various credentials such as a high school diploma, bachelor's degree, master's degree in various educations, etc. This was an employment preparation training program to assist students in areas such as entrepreneurship, job and career readiness, job retention, re-entering the job market, and updating skills. Previously, Shareefah served as an instructor in business colleges, and she currently works in the area of awareness advocacy for persons who are blind or visually impaired. I would like to welcome and introduce Shareefah.
Thank you very much, Dana.
You're welcome. It's good to see you.
And it's good to see you also. And what I'd like to emphasize today, the majority of the students that I had during the years were mainly low vision and considered visually impaired. I had very few students who were actually totally blind, which usually refers to just light perception. And so my focus will mainly be on those who are visually impaired. They had some vision, but very low vision, even though I will mention something also about the ones who had blind light perception. Now, one of the main things that I like to emphasize, and I'll go to the next slide. Now,
if I can interrupt you, if you'll go to slideshow rather than it's up on the top navigation bar.
Oh, okay.
Then we can see it's right up.
It's not showing up. Oh, okay.
See where it says file, home, insert, draw, design.
Oh, right. I can find, I guess I'm so used to shortcut key commands, right?
There you go.
Okay.
Well, we're still not seeing the entire slide. We're seeing the program. If you'll click on slide up at the very top.
I can bring it up. Okay.
Double click on slideshow.
Okay.
There you go. Okay, thank you.
Okay, fine. Can you see the full screen? Looks like part of it is missing.
We can see the slide.
Yeah, we see the full screen.
Okay, because part of my menu is covering it. So I'm using Windows 10, although these commands are good for Windows 10 and 11. Okay. And we emphasize the shortcut key commands in the program because of the fact that the students did have problems with reading the print. And one of the programs that they did use was Zoom Text, which helped to enlarge the print even more. But without that, you can also use Ease of Access Center that Microsoft has, even though it's not as extensive as it would be with Zoom Text. And some of you may have used, and you probably have, all of us from time to time, Microsoft support. And it is very extensive, and it does cover a lot. Now at the Ease of Access Center, I won't go into it, but you can easily set it so that it could be for the magnifier, which will be the Zoom, or you can set it for Microsoft's screen reading program, which is the narrator. There are also other screen reading programs that can be used, and Microsoft has accessibility and compatibility to such programs as JAWS or the NVDA for non-visual display access. And also I made a special note that if you do use a screen reading program, to please avoid using any other speech or voice program because you will get a major conflict. Some of the very popular voice commands that we have, for instance, for the Windows key, if you would like to just speak, as we say, into the computer and it'll print out on the screen, is the Windows H key. Or if you're inside of a Microsoft Office program, in this case, PowerPoint, it could also be Word, it could be Excel, then there is the dictation icon that can also be used. Also, using the Speak Aloud program that's in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, I did list some of the commands on the screen. Depending upon which version that you use of the Microsoft Office or which windows you have, it may not be exactly the same. For instance, where you see arrow right 6 times, I had another version where you had to arrow 9 times. If you use the PowerPoint quick access toolbar, of course, it's also in Word and Excel, you can set up speech, what we refer to as read aloud text to speech. And I'll give you an example of that on the screen. The way it's set up, and I listed the commands where you have to select them. And then when you get to the end, you select the speech commands. So after it's selected, then you can actually select the text and then voice will speak it. Okay, I'll give an example and I'll type something. There's 26. Just type 26. Whoops. I'm glad it's not 34. Oh. The keyboard that I'm using, sometimes I have a problem with the proximity of the keys. I'm actually using 2 different keyboards. One is wireless and one is on the laptop. So I switch back and forth. Now, I have to move the menu at the top because it's in my way. At the top of the screen, you can see where we have toward the end, where we had the down arrow, the customized quick access toolbar. I've already set it up based upon the commands that I showed you, but it is already on and activated. So I'm going to select the text. And if I press Alt-6 in PowerPoint, then the program should be read if all is working well. So I'll try that now.
July 26th, 2023.
Okay, that's good. It is working. If you are in Word or Excel, then it would be Alt-5 as opposed to Alt-6. So this is helpful also if someone is using a screen reader. Again, it cannot be simultaneous, but if they turn off the screen reader and would like to read it according to the program, in this case, PowerPoint, that's the command that they would use. One thing that I would like to mention, I'll select there. Microsoft has a very extensive accessibility. Some of you may have used it for some of your students. And I'll give you an example of it, where it covers the different types of disabilities. They have what we call a disability center on answer desk also. And you can get a lot of help with the Windows and with the Microsoft 365. And also there are the keyboard shortcut commands. Also have that accessibility on YouTube. There's even the sign language support. And there is a number that they also list if you need to call them. Oftentimes it's usually the chat or it'll be something online. But again, you can access them by phone. And it's very helpful because they have different areas depending upon if there's a hearing impairment, a vision impairment, if there's dyslexia. Going back to the window where I selected the text, and again, we use a lot of shortcut key commands, even with the screen reader, there are some mouse commands, believe it or not. One of the quick ways to be able to access the font dialog box is to use Control-T. And then here we have a lot of information all at once instead of having to go to the ribbon. And I'm going to change the font name. One of my favorites is Arial Black because I noticed the students could read that very well because it's very thick and it's also bold, nice dark black where it's easy for them to see. And then I'm also going to change the size. And I'm going to change the color. I just drop the mouse. So I was using the shortcut key commands, but I use the mouse also. And again, many of the students do too. We're going to change the color to red. And in a short while, I'll tell you why. I accidentally canceled instead of okay. So now I need to go back. Control-T again. And I'll change back to Arial Black. I'll change the color again back to red. And I'm just arrowing down to the red. Down too far. And I'll change the size again to 48. Okay, now you can see where the color changed. when I go to different slides, I usually press Alt Tab. It's a very popular command. You may also use that. This is one of the main areas that Microsoft has for the PowerPoint presentation, for different tips for making the presentation accessible to persons with disabilities. And it has different categories. So one of them is when the students first open a blank presentation. See if I can open one without losing anything. Have to be careful about sharing the screen without opening so I don't lose it. Okay, here's one. One of the first things that I usually teach them, sometimes this keyboard doesn't work too well, is when they do open the blank presentation, is to set the theme. And so they will go to the design tab, and usually the shortcut key command that they use is Alt G. This is one that I selected, and they like being creative with different colors, different designs. But for the accessibility, what's important about the colors is the contrast that you have. If you have a light color, then you need a darker color combined with it. So I'm going back to the July 26th to show you something about the color, why I made it red. We have an accessibility checker, and that is to check to see if the slide is accessible. But even before we do that, I'd like to show you a hyperlink, how easy it is to show someone who is visually impaired to set up a hyperlink. I have just 2 slides with a few words on it. I'll switch to that. Have to keep moving the menu, it gets in one. Back, losing some of what I had shared. One thing I noticed when I was setting this up, that some of the windows don't always share right away. And I have to bring them back up. See if I can. The command that we use for the hyperlink is Control K, and some of you may use that, or you can go to the ribbon tab and use the insert. So when this was set up, we only used basically two commands. Either they used the Control K or they went to the Insert tab on the ribbon. And an example was to show how to send the hyperlink within the document. And this is the one I selected. So I'm going to click on that, the Control, and it took me directly to one that I'd set up for two different categories. One would be questionable if something is accessible, and if it's easy to access it. So with different colors, I selected the red. That's why I changed the July the 26th to red. And it is recommended in the accessible menu to use a grayscale because it's easier to see. However, the reason why I type questionable, it may or may not be accessible. So we'll use what we call the accessibility checker. There are different ways that you can access it. You can either go through the File ribbon tab, or you can go through the Review, or you can just type Alt-Q for the search. My favorite one is Alt-R. So first, I need to go to the actual slide. I'll go back to the one where I typed the July the 23rd in red, and we'll see if it's accessible or not. Even though it says that the color is questionable, it does not necessarily mean that it's not accessible. So I'm going to press Alt-R. My keyboard is not working that well, so I had to click on it. So I went to the Review tab, and you can see where it says Check Accessibility. And now I go within the sub-menu that says Check Accessibility. And on the right side, the pane will tell us if it's accessible or not. And it says no accessibility issues found. People with disabilities should not have difficulty reading the presentation. So that is an example of where the students can be creative. They can use different colors. It doesn't always have to be grayscale, but the colors need to be contrasting. If you have a light background, then you need a darker or a deep tone foreground, and then the opposite. If you have a dark background, then you would like light text. So there's something else that I'm sure that many of you have probably used, because we all like to have images in our PowerPoint slides to make them more appealing. So I'm going to use an example. I created a pie chart. It's hypothetical. The pie chart says school budget. And here, we'd like to know if it's considered accessible. Because if someone is totally blind, even though you have a color coded, they would not be able to tell what the different percentages are in the description in the actual pie chart. So we need to see, let me exit out of this. You can either right click, sometimes depending upon the area, here we are, or Shift F10 for the right mouse button key, or you may refer to it, some of you I know as the context menu. And then we go down to view alternate text. And I already typed the alternate text, so I shouldn't have a problem with the accessibility checker. And you can see where I just hypothetically typed 65% blue. I gave the color and what it covered: student, staff, teaching and learning, curriculum material, and etc. So that anyone using a screen reader will know exactly what it's for. And also, if someone is just using, let's say, the Zoom feature, you can always make it larger so it'll be easier for them to see. Now, if someone is using the screen reader just to hear the voice, it's easier for them the smaller the image is, or even smaller the text is, but not large at all. But if someone has dyslexia, it is recommended by the accessibility in Microsoft to use a font that is at least 18 points or higher. Okay. See what else we have. I want to go to captions. Closed caption. Is the screen showing up okay now?
It's still showing up in the PowerPoint with all the slides on the left and main
You
slide.
said it.
It's not in presentation mode, but that's okay.
Okay. Did the chart show up? That I was,
All text on the right is yes.
And the chart shows, the pie chart shows.
oh, okay, good. Let me see. Is this showing up okay about using caption subtitles and alternative audio tracks and video?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because I wanted to emphasize that the way that Microsoft has it set up, and I'll just read it, that PowerPoint supports the playback of video with multiple audio tracks. It also supports closed captions and subtitles that are embedded in video files. Currently, only PowerPoint for Windows supports insertion and playback of closed captions or subtitles that are stored in files separate from the video. For all other editions of PowerPoint, such as PowerPoint for Mac or the mobile edition, closed captions or subtitles must be encoded into the video before they are inserted into PowerPoint. Now, and the most recent version of Microsoft Office, if someone is not using the 365 subscription, it's Office 2021. Okay, I'll read the rest of this. Supported video format for captions and subtitles vary depending on the operating system that you're using. Each operating system has settings to adjust how the closed captions or subtitles are displayed. For more information, go to closed caption file type supported by PowerPoint. Closed captions, subtitles, and alternative audio tracks are not preserved when you use the compressed media or optimized media compatibility feature. Also, When turning your presentation into a video, closed captions, subtitles, or alternative audio tracks in the embedded videos are not included in the video that is saved. And I got this information from the help menu in PowerPoint. And for the shortcut key commands, I went to Alt, Y, and H, which doesn't seem to be working too well on my computer today because it keeps freezing. Or you can just click on the help menu. So I'm going to try a caption to see if it will work okay. I'll go back to the July 26th. And here I'll set this up so that it will be a slideshow. And I'll start it from the beginning. Before I do that, I'm going to set up the subtitle. And I usually like the subtitles to be below the slide, so I'll select that. Now I'll start it from the, oh, I'll need to record it. If I don't record it, it won't work. I'll record it from the beginning. Let's see, it says your media record device. Oh, there is a problem. I forgot sometimes when it's used with Zoom. Let me see what this is. It's working. The title of the slide is July 26, 2023. Looks like it didn't work, the caption part. But you can see how the process is. And usually you'll be asked if you'd like to export. And then when you click on it, usually the file explorer will come up for the menu that you would like. But again, the caption, it'll usually work if you're in the slideshow mode, and then you would select the subtitle, and that's at the far right of the ribbon, and then record it. So I'll execute this part. Going down to the bottom of one of the slides at the end, here it mentions some of the websites of screen reading and screen magnification programs, because what I'd like to emphasize is, and that many professors and instructors have asked me if the student needs to learn simultaneously different programs, for instance, like PowerPoint, Excel, Word. At the same time, they're learning the speech program. I strongly recommend that if they are using a speech program or screen reading program, or if they're using screen magnification, that they learn how to use those programs first before they start any training. Because if not, it's going to create a problem and be very time consuming, especially when you're working with a group of people. But they'll have problems also individually. So some of the main ones that are very popular and also supported by Microsoft Office. And Microsoft also has training on them. If you go to their website for their support, and one of them is the non-visual desktop access, and that is a open source. That one, there's no cost for it. However, if you use Freedom Scientific, sometimes it can be rather expensive. It could be hundreds of dollars, a few hundred. Some people have paid $1,000 for it. Okay. And there may be a later version than 18. I forgot to double check it. Usually I'll check something the day before or a couple of days before I do. And with the Zoom text version, we have the different versions where they can be combined. Some people will use speech and magnification. Now, if they do use a screen magnification, the speech is not as comprehensive as it would be with just a screen reading program by itself. And one thing I like to mention also with the screen reading program and accessibility, it's very important also to check the order of the reading. Sometimes you may need to describe on the slide because of the fact that, for instance, with the JAWS screen reading program, there are certain commands that they use, and it will mention different columns and headings, and the reading is not necessarily the same as the way we would read. Here also are some websites of Microsoft Windows and Mac accessibility. And here again, we have the Microsoft support. Okay, and if you just type in accessibility, there's a lot that will be accessible. There is something else that I would like to demonstrate, show the students that the way that Microsoft is set up now, there are some slides that have already been created, and I'm sure that you've seen those. And we also let the students know that if you do select one of those, it's easy to modify it and to add your own information. For instance, this one that has the class, it had just 20 and I added the 23. And I don't remember the name of the college, but I just added A through Z University. And you can also use different sound effects, which I did. And I'll see if this one is going to work. Okay, it did. That was the applause. Oh.
Thank you for sharing those techniques.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that because, you know, I think we've gotten those. Or did we lose Shareefah?
What?
Did we lose Shareefah?
I think we did.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Okay, I know.
I'm
I
going to
remember.
pause the recording. We are recording.
Okay. Well, today we have with us Dr. Tony Shannon, and he is the Dean of the Commercial Education Society of Australia. And as you all know, this is an affiliation with the International Society for Business Education. That's why he is with us here. Tony is a 6th-generation Australian on his mother's side, so he comes with a lot of experience. And he did mention that his ancestor back in 1792, I believe, was a soldier, and his mother was a convict. So he comes way from a long line of Australians, because we know that Australia was once a convict colony. Tony graduated from the University of Sydney in the 1950s with a Bachelor of Science degree, and then he has added a Doctor of Philosophy in number theory, a Doctor of Education in philosophy, and a Doctor of Science in epidemiology and public health. He has 2 other Doctors of Honors as well, and he is an Emeritus Professor of Mathematics at the University of Technology in Sydney, where he is also the Foundation Dean, or was also the Foundation Dean of the Graduate Research School. He still teaches a capstone course in accountancy in a business degree, and he is the CEO of the Australian Institute of Technology and Commerce in Sydney. So he is still active, very active, and one of our senior members for sure. And I'd just like to add one article of interest that Tony shared, and that is that he has 2 horses. One is called Michael and the other is Keith. And 100 years ago, he says that horses were owned by everyone. And I can confirm that because my father owned horses as well, but only the rich had cars. Today, everyone has a car, and it seems as though only the rich own horses. So you can see how times have changed, and I guess as we know from this morning, they will continue to change. Tony, we're glad you're with us today and you're able to present critical thinking in English in the international classroom.
Thanks for the introduction, Jerry. It's a pleasure to be here. The poster idea is that while one attempts more than one should in a lecture, it provokes interest from people that might otherwise not be interested in the thing as a whole. So last year I experienced the fact that about 5 people after the meeting contacted me on different aspects of what we'd touched on. And that's very useful for my learnings. So I'm trying to learn more than teach at the moment. In Australia, we have a lot of international students, mainly from Asia. We have a few from New Zealand, Russia, Bulgaria, variety of places, but mainly from China, Nepal, India. This year, my institution actually has more international students than domestic. The extent to which we're milking a cash cow is quite debatable. And I want to go through some of the aspects of it with you. So I'll just stop at the first bit on international students. There are 4 aspects here. Lesbians, non-English speaking background students. I find with my Indian students in particular, many of them have 4 languages, of which English is the 4th. Others are quite adept at memorizing. So I'm trying to develop a little program on limited English speaking background, because many of them have learnt the way I learned Spanish, and that is you memorize lots of phrases and hope you can put them all together at the right time. But Australians tend to speak rather quickly. You may think I'm speaking quickly now, but if I were to say, Ashkan, mate, all right, that's how's she going, mate, all right. So they get to Australia and they find the way they learnt in Bangkok or Delhi or wherever is very different from the way it sounds here, particularly in lectures. If I can get a limited English speaking background program going, I'll be including Aussies as well. Many of the youngsters who get from elementary school to high school, it's estimated about 60% in this state, have functional illiteracy. And high school teachers generally aren't taught here to teach how to read and write. It's a separate issue. As I said, many of these are multilingual, which is good for them. The difficulty can be they tend to live in accommodation where they're mainly speaking with people from their own part of India or Thailand or wherever, and they don't improve their English. There are clashing cultures because often they are very much encouraged to memorize. We tend not to encourage it as much. Although as an old-fashioned fogey, I believe in quite a bit of memorization in the sense that there's some things I believe you need to know inside out. And they come to with clashing cultures where various conventions are different in terms of what you can quote and how you quote it and how you attribute it. And of course, this can lead to very big problems in terms of apparent cheating, although it's not. And people use Turnitin and other devices to try to detect it. I won't go into AI chatbot, but that's there as well. So I've just touched on memorization. One of the things that we don't do well, even when we're enriched with so many from different cultures, we don't learn much from their cultures. If they're here for 4, 5 or more years, they learn a lot from ours. But we make very little effort at times, it seems to me, to learn from their cultures. They might have a Malaysian evening or something, but it's more a passing tribute rather than a genuine encounter. Even to the extent that some universities will put all the Bangkok students in a class full of Bangkok students rather than try to mix them. So this is another area where we have to learn a lot. Admittedly, the regulators are trying to get us to do that, but with limited success so far. Like everyone, there's a problem now, I suppose, with modern means of communication, which I think are great, even if it means getting up at 5 a.m. rather than being present at the end of the morning or something. But there is this big problem at the moment of distinguishing amongst information, how that's turned into knowledge. And there are many aspects of knowledge, as we all know, and then ultimately, hopefully, into wisdom. sometimes you get the impression that people think you can do a Wisdom 101 course and then you're right. People also think you become wise with age. I wish that were true. There is a critical thinking taxonomy. I'll touch on that a bit later, but I'll look at some aspects now. Critical thinking is only going to happen if you want it to happen, but wanting to happen won't be enough. The students themselves have to appreciate gradually, not all in one go, what you mean by critical thinking, so that when you hand something back and suggest that the analysis could go deeper, they need to know what you mean by that. And of course, when I had a year in Spain and I would write things in English and then translate them into Spanish, rather than trying to think in Spanish. So there are a lot of dimensions to this which I can only flirt with today. I'll give a reference to a critical thinking taxonomy. We're all familiar with Bloom's taxonomies, and there are others. And I think our next periodic discussion paper at CSIS got more on this from a person in Cambodia. So there's levels, a lower level, interpreting. All of these have a variety of meanings. Identifying, which at one level is not much more intellectually sound than stamp collecting. Clarifying, and what's meant by functional literacy. As I said, I'll touch briefly on that later. Functional literacy in general, though, means being able to function by reading what you need to read. For some, it's reading football scores. Hopefully it's more than that when they're doing a university degree. Clearly, you can't do all this in one go. But as Jerry said, I teach capstone units which come at the end of a degree, and that's where I get quite alarmed at how they progress during the degree. Higher level ones involve some of the things that you get in Bloom, like analysing, synthesising, and predicting. Usually by the time they get to the end of the degree, they're quite good at analysing, although they find it difficult to ask questions. They're used to being asked questions. And then predicting, well, I'm a thoroughbred horse racing fan, so I like to be able to predict, but the thing is, it's easy to predict, it's very hard to test your prediction. And that has to be done, and that's conjecturing. And on the quantitative side, often they're very weak at conjecturing, although the mathematical Olympiads require that, and that's where they're really good. Some of the complex tasks are evaluating, verbal reasoning, and here you can see their minds ticking over where they're transliterating back into whatever their most comfortable language is, and making inferences, and that leads into problem solving. And then the deep ones are metacognition, knowing what you know, knowing how you know it, knowing why you know it, self-regulation, being able to analyze what you have learnt. Applied epistemology, which is a mouthful, I suppose, but it's knowing how to know. One of the things I liked in the bad old days, in the 50s, was the big emphasis on knowing a little very well. Whereas now with continuous assessment, the emphasis is on knowing a little about everything. The value of knowing some things really well is that you can teach yourself new things, which I've had to do in my own rather long life, I suppose. And then critical reflection, which is probably the hardest of all, in the sense of knowing what critical actually means and how to develop it. I mentioned I'd say a bit more about information literacy. I can send all this material to anyone who's interested or to everyone if necessary. According to the Australian and New Zealand Institute for Information Literacy, an information literate person recognises the need for information literacy and determines the nature and extent of the information needed. Finds needed information effectively and efficiently. Critically evaluates information and the information seeking process. Manages information collected or generated. Applies prior and new information to construct new concepts or create new understandings. Uses information with understanding and acknowledges cultural, ethical, economic, legal, and social issues surrounding the use of information. Now that's a mouthful, and as I said, I'm more than happy to send material to people later, because in a short poster session, one can't do anything thoroughly, which goes against what I claimed earlier, that the education I received in the 50s was knowing a lot about a little. If I could just give an example of that without digressing too far. In mathematics exams then, we used to get 8 questions. If you got 3 out of 8 fully correct, you get a high distinction. We didn't get marks then. But if you got 8 out of 8 half right, you'd barely pass, because the emphasis is knowing how to do a thing completely well. So what are some of the solutions that we're trying? One is a genuine cultural interchange. I don't mean just having an evening where it's a dinner from a particular culture and they're dressed in their native costumes and doing some dancing, but really understanding how things tick. No matter what degree they're doing, most will go back to their own countries, hopefully enrich their own countries, and many of them will become leaders in their own countries with whom our own leaders will have to deal. I can't help harking back to the 50s, but then we had what was called the Colombo Plan. And we actually paid people from various parts of Asia to come to Australia. And for people like me, that was our first encounter on a long-term basis with people from Vietnam, Cambodia, and so on. Now the boot's on the other foot and they pay to come here. A separate issue, of course, is some who get the certificate of enrolment, which enables them to get a visa, but then they disappear into the woodwork with no intention of studying. But again, as I say, that's a separate issue. Behavioural empathy. That's appreciating the subtleties at times in behaviour without causing undue offence. So if we go out with our students to a Chinese meal, they'll expect us to use chopsticks. When they come to a Western meal, we try to teach them how to use a knife and fork. I'm not saying one is better or different. I mean, obviously different, but better than the other. But sometimes when they go for a job interview, often if it's a big, good firm, the job interviews will go all day. In the morning, they'll look at your good points. In the afternoon, they'll look at your bad points. We run a 12-week program where we try to help them turn their bad points into good points. Because a good interviewer, if he or she detects the bad points, but the person being interviewed can say what they're doing to rectify them, it makes a big thing. But in between the morning and afternoon session, often they're invited to have a light lunch with the committee. And this is where the committee is looking at little things that can make a difference to whether they get the job or not. Putting your knife in your mouth, for instance, is a no-no. Wearing a woolen cap at your meal, unless it's for medical or religious reasons, is a no-no. It's little things. We have to have targeted language support. I've tried doing some of that with jokes, and most of my jokes fall flat on Aussies, let alone someone from Laos. But you can learn from jokes, particularly with words that have the same sound but different meanings, things like that. There are diverse cultural perspectives. And so we are trying, it's present participle, to absorb some of the cultural features and giving them a chance to talk about them. Now, people can see this as taking time away from talking. We still have lecturers in a 50-minute session feel they have to talk for the whole 50 minutes. As adults, we know we take so much in through a variety of senses. Even leaving them at the end of a session with a question. Getting at the definite critical foundations of whatever it is we're teaching. Why are we teaching it? Where does it fit into the whole? What difference is it going to make at the end of the semester? As you can see, there's much room for further study. As I said, I'm a bit biased because I'm teaching capstone units. There's not a lot of literature on capstone units. They're units where the students are encountering an industry level problem. I get ones from friends in big accounting firms asking them, what would you expect a group of first-year graduates to be able to do for you? For instance, it could be designing a childcare centre because the head of the accounting firm has had someone approach him or her for finance to start a childcare centre. So they're not learning a lot of new material, but if the structure is well designed, they can extract a lot from what they have already learnt. So that childcare centre one was an actual one, and they did an excellent job about it. They looked at areas of Sydney where there are a lot of young couples, and therefore, hopefully, a lot of new babies coming, where there wasn't another childcare centre. They had to look at the legislation, because there's more and more legislation for these things and whom you can employ. They learned a lot that had very little to do with an accounting degree per se. But at the end of the program, they love it. And one of the reasons they love it is it's a group study. Groups of 4 generally, but that's negotiable. So they have to learn how genuinely over an extended period to work as a group. They have encountered some group assignments, but spending a whole semester on a group is quite difficult, particularly if their group doesn't have a native English speaker. That's a separate issue, but it does relate to the topic of this so-called poster. We have to have more research into actual business classes. Coming from an actual mathematical background, it would be silly of me to teach a business class the way I teach a maths class. I mean, there are certain elements. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning, you go back to what they know and what they're going to learn. In the middle, you apply it, you compare it. In the end, you summarize it, make recommendations. But I was a naval officer when I was young, and there the way of teaching was to shout, tell them what you're going to do, show them how to do it, ask them to show what you've done. And you have to be careful, because if they had loaded Thompson submachine guns on the weapons range, you had to be careful not to insult them. There has been a tendency here for people to teach classes mainly focusing on how to teach, and that's good in a sense, but forgetting about the subtle variations of how you teach in terms of what you teach. I've given you a couple of references to Sonia White, who's done a lot of work on information literacy. She's at Griffith University in Queensland. NCVER is the National Council for Vocational Education Research. At the moment, we're having one of those perennial discussions in Australia about training and education. In recent years, there's been a wall between them, at least the regulators which accredit the courses have had it. Although back in the 50s, sorry to keep going back that far, when most of your grandparents weren't even born, but in honours physics, we used to spend 1 day per week at a neighbouring technical college studying applied electricity, metalwork, technical drawing, and a range of subjects which were not in the university degree. At the very minimum, they taught us how to respect our instruments. But you couldn't do that now in the current regulatory framework. There are rumours in the bazaars that that's going to change, but we'll see. So that's basically what I wanted to go through with that rather complicated roadmap. It may not apply where you're teaching, although hopefully there's some aspects of it which will. International students, it's been the focus because there's such a big proportion of undergraduates in Australia. But domestic students themselves have different subcultures. There are people whose ancestors have been here from Europe for a long time. Not far from where I am, there are suburbs with native populations of almost purebred Aboriginal stock. Of course, there are intermarriage between groups. There are groups who are children of what we call displaced persons that came from Europe after the Second World War. There are increasingly groups coming from parts of Asia that we didn't encounter once. So while I've focused on international students because they're the ones I deal with most as a category, much of what I said, I believe, applies to subcategories among domestic students. We can't assume that they are all white Australian Protestants. One of the things I like about our current era is the openness to respect for others. I don't like when it becomes enforcement, but I like to see it encouraged. At the moment, we're in our rugby season. On the rugby field, you look where the referee is. If you feel he can't see you, you may do things that are not in the law book. You may shove someone's face in the mud. A variety of things, but at the end of the day, you shake hands with everyone and you have a drink. You may not entirely respect everyone. Here we call rugby the game they play in heaven. My big question about that is, I don't think there are any referees in heaven. So how do they play it? Anyway, I'll leave it at that and open to questions that I can try to answer if anyone has any. Thank you. Thank you for listening. And I thank the organisers for enabling me to participate from down under.
Thank you, Tony, for your presentation. And we really appreciate your coming and on at 5 o'clock in the morning, your time, and talking about this interesting subject. I had one question, and I'm sure some other questions might arise too, but what do you do with language idioms? I mean, we all talk about putting the shoe on the other foot, or as you said, putting the boot on the other foot. These are things that foreigners, when you're teaching English, haven't a clue what you're talking about.
Yes, the non-English speaking courses are supposed to deal with these, but they don't satisfactorily because the International English Language Testing Service and others deal with correct English, not idiomatic English. And that's why I'm trying to develop, with people who know more than I do, a course for limited English-speaking background students. And that can include domestic students, some because of the family background, others because of where they live. Some of you may have read some of the books by Jill Kerr Conway, an Australian woman who was president of Smith College for many years. One of her books was True North. Her father's World War I property, which were given to soldiers, was so vast, it was 100 miles from a home to a front gate. They're huge properties. I used to work up in Broome in far northwestern Australia. The Catholic Diocese of Broome is 29 times the size of England. The bishop there, whom I knew from the army, found it difficult to report to Rome, where some of the dioceses are about the size of a suburb. They had no concept of what he was dealing with. He went through 2 cars each year and 1 plane each year. That was something that wasn't ever dealt with in seminary training. So, Jerry, you've raised a very big issue that I'm trying to pursue with limited technical knowledge of teaching English, but you only encounter it when you realize you've set an assignment and people don't know some key words or key phrases.
Especially in conversational English, which is why I think that the dinners, the cultural dinners and events and meetings where conversational English can take place, and they pick up these things.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Jerry.
Is there anyone else who might have a question?
I just wanted to comment that I really appreciate your presentation and your sense of humor. Thank you.
I would say that
some people hate it.
I appreciate it.
I would say that just listening has made me have to think more critically, and which is perhaps the point.
Yes.
Very, very entertaining.
Well,
Yes.
I had to check myself. I was sitting laughing a couple of presentations ago. The speaker had a slide up with a woman with a burden on her back and a man with a pig on his back. And so I so much wanted to say, oh, I guess that must be a male chauvinist pig. And I thought, oh, some of the people may not understand the humor at all. So
Yeah.
I didn't say it.
Yes, I have an MCP tie, which I wear occasionally when I want to stir people.
Well, having taught math and English